All right, this is AP Lit. We're reviewing the papers we wrote on the Crucible. We sent underlined titles. So make sure it's a little thing, but too many little things add up. They're not going to dock you for, I didn't underline the title. I'm taking big points off of that. It's just how many of those mistakes are you making? Do you have an understanding? Every time you don't underline it, they may take offense at that. You know, they say, this is basic, non-AP stuff. I don't like this paper. You don't know. But make sure that's a little thing, but do it. Secondly, and this is, again, no order, avoid cliches. And I was going to get a list for you. I just didn't have time. You know what a cliche is, training cats and dogs. We talk in cliches a lot, but you don't want to write in them. So a cliche also, to me, it's not really necessarily a cliche, but I guess it could be, is anything that comes in your head that's already put together. You know what I mean? Like, there are several words that just come right up because this is the way people say it at the end of the day. That's a cliche, right? At the end of the day, several words, it comes to you all at once. You didn't build that phrase yourself. So you want to avoid cliches. And third thing along with that, you want to avoid moral lessons. The readers won't like that because most modern writers, and I guess even beyond that, they're not writing to teach you a moral lesson. Like, do not commit adultery was not the lesson of the Scarlet Letter. It was a lesson, because man, they made a mess of a lot of things, but that was not the purpose of it. That was not the moral. Most great literature doesn't have a moral lesson. They would claim that's below them. Like, we just show you what life is and you can draw your own conclusions. That's what's right and wrong. So avoid moral lessons. Here's number 4. Yeah, I noticed this, and I think I mentioned it earlier. This is not an appropriate argument to just state it as if it were true, and then after that restate it differently, and then maybe again state it a third time. You're not really supporting it. You're just restating something. All right, you don't want to do that. You getting this, Claire? Write it all down, right on top of the math stuff. That's good. Don't get them confused. I don't know how you do that. I was not smart enough to do math and AP Lit at the same time. But you're smarter than I am, sure. Provide evidence. That was the biggest weakness that I saw that we just need to work on. To me, it's something we all kind of understand. You make a point and then you back it up. All right. 5th, make your 3 points. And again, it's always something that I wish I had done, but I'm going to give you an exercise at this. Several of you did it well. Most of you made 3 points. Like Abigail is the villain of the story because, and I'm trying to make up something that's not parallel, she committed adultery. Everything she did turned out badly, and dishonesty. You see how those 3 things, there are 3 things there. I spot the 3 things because there are 2 commas between them. But none of them are written in the same way. You see, when you have 3 points, you need to make those points parallel. In other words, simply she's the villain because of adultery, dishonesty, and lying, which is the same thing as dishonesty, but that's parallel. Or you could say because of her adultery, because of her adultery, and because that's overriding. That's awkward. But we need to do some exercising because I think that could make you instantly that could instantly make you a better writer. When I learned to do that, I felt like, man, this helps me even think through the paper better. I can even argue better because I'm more organized now. I see it's right here. It's better for me. Whatever number we're on, 6 or 7. This is a good thing to do. repeat words to create coherence from the thesis statement to each of the topic sentences. You don't have to necessarily repeat the topic, the thesis in each topic sentence. But anytime you repeat individual words, like you're trying to make the point about dishonesty, well, use the word without overdoing it. Use the word dishonesty 2 or 3 times in the paragraph, because that helps me remember what you're trying to prove. It helps you remember what you're trying to prove. And here's just a few more. Analyze more deeply. As that I put over here. Sometimes I might say dig deeper, or your insight is thin. In other words, go beyond what's obvious. She committed adultery. That's obvious. She shouldn't do that. Everybody knows that. Tell me something I don't know. And of course, I mentioned earlier, Abigail was what 90% of you did, and I said that's fine if you don't know anybody else really to do. But that puts you at a disadvantage, because I've read 30 papers about Abigail and 7 papers about somebody else. And those other papers, as soon as I see Danforth, somebody picked Danforth, which was, I thought, really smart. Nobody picked Giles Corey. His name wasn't mentioned at all in any paper. He's not really a villain, but he's a victim. But anyway, just picking a different, maybe not what's obvious, would be appropriate. And just trying to go past the obvious. And let me give you an example. Several of you mentioned that she picked innocent people in town to accuse. And at least on one paper I wrote, did you notice what those innocent people had in common, at least at first, before she got to people like Proctor and Elizabeth and Goody Nurse? What did they have in common? The first ones that she picked, did you notice anything about those people? Well, one was a homeless woman. One was a woman that was basically crazy. These were people that were already outcasts. So it would be easy to get the Salem's approval, because nobody liked them anyway. Well, that makes sense. I already knew she was kind of crazy the way she lives, so I knew something had to be there, but nobody did that. Why did she pick those people? Why did she start with the most vulnerable? Yeah.
So she can work her way out.
Yeah, and when she overstepped her bounds when she started picking really strong people in the community, and then people started saying, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this. So it was things like that I think could have enhanced some of your papers. It sounds awkward, but you hang a picture today. I hung it yesterday, right? I hang a guy from the gallows today, and I hanged him yesterday. It sounds awkward. You don't use it in any, because how many last time you talked about somebody getting hanged? I mean, this would be the only time we mention hanging all year. But that's the appropriate way. Hang and hanged as opposed to hung, which is what you do to pictures on the wall. I hung it yesterday, or I hung a door yesterday, but he was hanged yesterday. Okay, last 2 things, I'm done. Most of you, and I didn't really make it an issue, most of you didn't discuss the meaning of the play as a whole, or you did it so subtly that I didn't notice it, and because if you did well, maybe that was it. I like to think that I did sort of subconsciously notice it. But that's going to be something you're always going to have to do, is try to figure out, what is Abigail? She's a villain. What does that have to do with the whole theme of this book? By the way, what would it? I need to get Will back in here. But what does Abigail's role as a villain, since most of you wrote on Abigail, what does she teach us about this book? Not just about her. What does she teach us about the book? And we didn't have a whole lot of time to talk about it, but why is she the catalyst? All these people hated each other. And that was another thing. Many of you didn't mention the fact that they did. Many of them Putnam hated Proctor, who hated Giles Corey. Giles Corey was suing everybody in town. And all they needed was some teenage girl to start calling out witchcraft. And that meant, okay, now I can get, I always thought I should have that land, but now all I have to do is get my daughter to call him a witch, and the land is mine. So she was the kindling, the match that started it. But it was just the outward thing from an invisible problem or an inner problem. So that's the kind of thing that would really tie it into the book as a whole, that societies fall apart when there's not trust and when there's not at least a give and take between people. When you start having these grudges, somebody mentioned grudges, but you didn't tell me. I thought that was great. And finally, that's the last thing. I know I've actually seen it in the AP material that if this character, Selwyn mentioned, like is a point, and if Abigail wasn't there, nothing would have happened. And it's kind of what I said, right? She kind of started it. But you could really say that about anybody in the book. And I think it could be a good point, but I think it's overdone, so I would avoid it. I would avoid just the general statement that without Abigail, there'd be no plot. That's how important she is. It's true, but you could say that about Proctor. I think you could say it more about Abigail, because Proctor didn't start it, maybe he did. But Abigail's even involved there with the adultery, so try to avoid that. I don't know how many that was. I hope you got them down. I think they may help you. Any questions about that? All right, so we need to write again soon, but it'll be a while. I gave you the sheet, the data sheet, right, yesterday? So that's due Tuesday. So would you get out the book one last time for the day, and we're gonna look at a poem. Yes. Julia's gonna go before we do that. Okay, let's listen to her. We've waited a long time. Not her fault, but because of me. We've waited a long time for her.
Okay. So I read Weather and Times by William Bronte, and my thesis was talking about how the social classes in society manipulate and kind of destroy the society. And this is shown through the shifting love interests. It's also shown through the abuse towards certain characters.
Abuse?
Yeah, the abuse. And then lastly, the internal conflict that some of the characters go through. And so, I guess one example of the love interest that was shifted due to the society was a quote by Catherine, and she said, "I've no more business to marry Edgar Linton than I have to be in heaven. And if the wicked man in there had not brought Euclid so low, I shouldn't have thought of it. It would degrade me to marry Euclid now, not because he's handsome, Nellie, but because he's more myself than I. Whatever our souls are made of, and mine are the same, and Linton's is as different as the moonbeam from the lightning or frost from the fire." So she's basically saying and Linton's one that she ended up marrying. So she's saying she would have married Euclid if it was point for the social classes and how that had brought Euclid's reputation down.
What's one reason we should read it? Because I've read it once, and I've not read it again. Why should I reread it?
I just think that one, it's an interesting read, I think, and also it teaches you about life, I guess.
Who did Jane Eyre? Anybody do? It seemed like, I mean, they were sisters, but in both cases, I remember Jane Eyre. There's abuse in there, right? Was she abused? Helen Burns was kind of abused, picked on, and you said there's that in here as well. Makes you wonder what the Bronte sisters had to grow up with, or what they saw, or maybe it was just common in those days. Good job. The other book that I've read several of you is Doll's House. I'll have to reread that. That's something AP students usually do. So would you turn to that sonnet? We have, I think we have 15 minutes, but it's, I think it's page 51. It's The World is Too Much With Us. It's in your blue book. And you had some questions with that. Danielle, do you mind reading it for us? Remember, this is a Petrarchan sonnet. So there's certain, I think I asked you, yes.
I don't think I have any questions.
All right, I got plenty. So would you read it?
The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away as sordid dreams, the sea that bears her bosom to the moon. The winds that will be howling at all hours, and are gathered up now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not, great God. I'd rather be a pagan suffered than a creed outworn. So mine eyes, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn. Have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn.
All right, so again, look at the questions. Speaker, situation, audience, those questions. What do we know about the speaker? Let's do this together. You know that because it's a sonnet, there's going to be a question or a problem that's later going to be answered or solved in the book. So what can you tell me, Daniel, about the speaker here?
I'd say that the speaker, he isn't optimistic, I guess, because he says here in the third line, he says, little we see in nature that is ours. So what I get from this is that he's not very optimistic, he's pessimistic.
What's the problem? What's he pessimistic about? It's a good start. You don't have to answer that, but since you brought it up, what's he pessimistic about? What's he negative about? What's the issue or the problem? What, anybody else can help us with that? Yeah.
So like he says, like we lay waste to our powers, and like the world is too much with us, like late and soon. So, like,
What does he mean? The world is too much with it. That's the problem. The problem is the world, but that doesn't. What do you mean? That's the problem. The only thing we've got. I mean, it's where we live. But what's the problem with the world?
like he says, like we're too like consumed in it, and like it's just causing us to like corrupt ourselves, I guess.
Okay, so when he uses the word world, it's poetry. You've got to start thinking like this. When you read the Bible, you see things like that too. God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Oh gosh, I can't ever remember this particular verse, but love not the things of the world. If you love the world, the love of the Father is not in you. What do you mean, love not the things of the world? Everything's from the world, all right? So what does the world mean biblically? I'd argue he's talking about more that than the physical world. What is the world? You ever heard a pastor talk about being too worldly? These are worldly people. What does that mean? Of course we're worldly people, Daniel.
Is it like sin?
Yeah, of course. So it's that mindset as opposed to what? Worldly versus what? what contrast or alternatives do you have the Bible giving? Like the New Testament, you're gonna be worldly or you're gonna be what? Yeah, godly or spiritual. That's often how it's put. So, what aspect of the world, that world, not the physical world, but what aspect of the world is he focusing on as sinful? I don't see him talking about murder. I don't see him talking about robbery, drug use. So those are things we might include. The world's too much with us. We got too many problems. But what's the problem that he sees with it? Ty, what's the problem he sees? And it's early in the poem. Remember the first 8 lines. That's what I'm telling you. That's where you find the answers. You can find the problem here and the solution here.
I guess I'm focused on like the nature part. It's kind of saying we're not appreciating it.
All right, so that's sort of the solution, right? If that's, he mentions the solution, nature, but what specifically about the world does he mention? Look at it. It's not that complicated. The second line kind of gives it away. Yes.
What is like getting and spending a lot? So I think it's kind of like saying that we kind of spend our life away on things that don't really matter.
And what is another word to call when you put too much emphasis on things? Like you want to buy the biggest house, the biggest materialism. So he's really focusing not on some of those dark crimes. He's focusing on just being too concerned with material things at the expense of, Ty, you mentioned it. What's the thing he is the solution to that? I thought you mentioned it.
Nature.
Yeah. So those are the two things. Half of the poem's about why materialism is what it's doing, and the second half, really the answer. So who's he talking to? I don't even see the word you in here. It's not a apostrophe. So is there any indication who he's talking to? Caroline.
He's talking to himself just as much as the people that are living with him.
Yeah, like Ms. Plasman did. Where's Will? Daniel, would you go find Will for? He might be right out there. Don't tell him I forgot him, please. But Ms. Plasman, I always appreciate pastors and speakers, you know, who point the finger back at themselves. And she did that. You know, say, I'm not pointing the finger at you, I'm pointing the finger at us. So he's doing that as well. So that's the situation and his concerns. Let's look at the solution. If that's the problem, how does nature, I think you could still be materialistic in nature. We got a big camper here. We're going to, we're traveling all over the country. It seems like there's an element of even materialism in that. We're going to Lake Tahoe, have a 5-star hotel. Seems like even though you're out in nature, you're really carrying the world with you. But what is it about nature, and where does that solution really begin to take shape in the poem? It's not a hard question. It's typographical. In other words, it's the way that the poem is put together. What is the solution, and where is that solution? Jonathan, where does it begin? It's the last 6 lines. Find that for us. And then you see a dash. So he couldn't be more obvious. Now we're going to the solution. Most sonnets are not that obvious. See, almost like a big arrow with a big sign. Now we're going to the solution. What is the solution? I mean, it's nature, but what is nature afford? It's got to be the last question. That the world does not. He said, "Great God, I'd rather be a pagan, standing on this pleasant lea, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of prayer." What's he talking about? Yeah.
Nature can make you happy and bring peace, but the materialistic things of the world.
Yeah, and what is it about nature? Last thing, what is it about nature? Where does nature particularly affect you? That things can never affect you. You put the clothes on, it affects your body. You drive the car, it affects your you know, your transportation, your body. But what does he say nature give you that material things can't touch? Because material things are all on the outside. So what does nature do? It goes to the inside, and look what it does. He's thinking back thousands of years at the Greeks and Romans who imagined. He said he'd rather be a pagan. At least they had a interesting life. They had an imagination that they could picture Proteus, and they could look at the sea, and the sea was more than just a place I'd jump in or sail on. It's a living thing, even though we know that that's paganism, but I like the idea that it's a living thing. It's almost like it's a living, breathing thing. Nature becomes alive. And he talks about it other places at the beginning. I would love for you to read the next one. And there's some questions here. I don't usually ask you to do that. Is that going to be too much of an issue? It's I don't know what your overnight looks like. You may have a lot of things going on. But the next poem is, I got to find it. And I can't find it. So where is it?
So we're doing the next one?
Yeah, it's actually 10 pages earlier. London, 1802. It should take you 15 minutes or 20 minutes. I wish it would take you an hour. Honestly, I'd feel great if you said, it took me an hour to read that and understand it. To me, that would be, wow. That would be what we want. So it looks like to me we get to go, even if it's not time, you can leave. I think it is. All right, we'll see. Now, please read that poem. It's,
Will you answer the question?
yeah, it's London, 1802. There's some questions there. We'll see you tomorrow. Good job.